They say the mountains have a long memory, that the old rocks and deep shadowed hollers remember things the modern world has tried to forget. Whispers don't just fade away here, they sink into the soil, they get caught in the roots of the ginseng and the witch hazel, waiting for a receptive ear. The things that lurk here aren't just animals, they're echoes of a darker time, wearing familiar skins to hide their hollow hearts. So listen close. I've got 3 stories for you tonight, pulled from the forgotten ledgers of park rangers, the hushed testimonies of folk healers, and the frantic CB radio transmissions of truckers who took a wrong turn. These tales have never been shared on this channel before, so if you've been waiting for a new descent into the ancient, creeping fear of these old hills, thank you for joining us. Your listenership is the lantern that guides us through these dark woods. Now, turn the lights down low, get comfortable, and let's walk together into the mist-shrouded heart of Appalachia. Remember, listener, discretion is advised.
Marlena was what the old-timers called a yarb woman. She knew the secrets of the forest, secrets whispered by roots and leaves, by water and stone. Fever could be broken with a bitter tea from willow bark. Infection could be coaxed out by a poultice of moss and lard. And mushrooms, well, mushrooms were tricksters. Some opened the door to heaven, some slammed it shut with a poisoned hand, and some could show a man the very face of God or the devil, depending on which one he truly sought. She had learned these things not from books, but from the voices of her grandmother and her grandmother before that, carried down like smoke from an old chimney. Marlena lived alone now in a cabin tucked so deep in a West Virginia hollow that the sun only touched her porch for an hour each day before slipping away behind the ridge. To most, that shadowed place would have felt lonely, but not to her. She had grown up with the dark, knew its weight, its music, its silences. She wasn't afraid of it. She respected it. But even the oldest songs and stories of her bloodline had not prepared her for what came to dwell in those woods. Something new had moved in behind her home, something that did not belong to the holler or to this earth at all. It began with silence. Not the ordinary hush of nightfall, nor the calm before a storm. This was a silence that pressed against the skin like damp wool, suffocating, unnatural. The constant chorus of crickets, katydids, and peepers, the background heartbeat of the forest, vanished one evening as if pulled from the air. Marlena noticed it first when she woke in the small hours, the hour she usually drifted back to sleep on the lull of frogs and owls. That night, all she heard was the rasp of her own breath. The silence deepened over the next week. The animals grew restless. Jasper, her blue heeler, spent more time under the stove than patrolling the yard. The chickens went missing, one by one. At first, she thought it must be a fox or a coon, but there were no feathers, no blood, no prints in the soft earth. They'd been swallowed by the night itself. Then came the man. It was late one evening when Marlena, pegging her wash to the line, felt the weight of eyes on her back. Turning, she saw him at the tree line, a figure standing very still among the trunks. He was tall and gaunt, wearing what looked like old sackcloth, shapeless and gray. The light was fading, blurring his features, but she saw enough to note the unnatural pallor of his long face. Marlena was not a woman who startled easy. She had seen bears, bobcats, and men with less kindness than either. So she called out across the yard, her voice steady. "Evening, stranger. You lost your way?" The man didn't answer. He didn't move. He only stood, half swallowed by shadow, watching. By the time the sun slid behind the ridge, he was gone. The next night, he returned. This time closer. Marlena had just lit her lantern and set it on the porch rail when she saw him standing just outside the halo of its glow. His mouth hung open as if he were about to speak, but no words came. His eyes, dark and vacant, never left her face. A chill coiled up her spine. Not fear, not yet, but a knowledge that this was no traveler from a back road, no lost hiker. This was something that did not belong. On the third night he came again, closer still. Now he stood at her garden gate, hands resting lightly on the latch. Jasper whimpered from inside, the sound muffled beneath the stove where he'd burrowed. Marlena stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Her grandfather's rifle. The weapon was old, but still true, the walnut stock worn smooth from generations of calloused hands. She leveled the barrel at the figure. "State your business," she commanded. The thing tilted its head, as though studying her voice rather than hearing it. Then, slowly, a sound came. A voice, dry as autumn leaves skittering across stone. "I'm cold," it rasped. "Let me warm myself by your fire." Marlena's finger tightened on the trigger. "You ain't welcome here. Move on." The thing's mouth stretched into a grin, but it was no human smile. It widened impossibly, splitting his face until it seemed the skin must tear. Rows of teeth gleamed in the lantern light, not white, but black, sharp as needles. "But I'm already in," it whispered. The words slithered through the stillness like smoke. Marlena's heart hammered. She spun toward the cabin at the sound, soft, shuffling steps inside her home. Yet she knew she had bolted the door. The cabin was dark, but something moved in there. With it came a smell, damp earth, rotten honey, the stink of graves disturbed. She wheeled back, rifle raised, but the figure at the gate was gone. The yard lay empty, silent as a tomb. That night, Marlena did not sleep. She sat at her table with the rifle laid across her lap, lantern burning low. The silence pressed heavy against the windows, and from time to time, she thought she heard breathing in the corners of the room where the lamplight did not reach. Days passed. She never saw the man again, not at the tree line, not at her gate. But Marlena knew he had not gone. He had spoken the truth in that ruined voice. He was already inside. The proof was in the little things. She'd wake up to find her herbs overturned, her jars of tincture unstoppered, though the cabin was locked tight. She'd hear faint scratchings in the walls as if roots were burrowing through wood. Jasper refused to leave the stove. The silence outside never lifted. Even the creek behind the cabin, usually burbling with life, seemed to have slowed to a sluggish whisper. At night she felt it most. The weight of unseen eyes watching her from the thicket. The air in her room thick with that same smell, earth and rot, and something sweet gone rancid. Sometimes she woke to the creak of floorboards beside her bed. Once, she swore she felt fingers brush her hair, cold as stone. But still she endured. She set charms of rowan and iron over her doors and windows, whispered prayers her grandmother had taught her, and kept the rifle within reach. But in her heart, she knew it would not be enough. For this thing, whatever it was not of fox or bear, nor even of man. It belonged to the thicket itself, to some older darkness that had found its way into her hollow. And things that live in the thicket have nothing but time. So Marlena waits even now. Each evening she lights her lantern and sets it on the porch, her rifle resting nearby. She waits for the silence to deepen, for the steps to come again from inside her cabin. She waits because she knows it has not left, not truly. It is watching, always watching. And it is patient. Because one day, maybe tomorrow, maybe years from now, she will forget to bar the door. She will let her guard down. She'll be tired or careless or simply too weary to fight the silence any longer. And when that day comes, the thing in the thicket will step out from shadow, smiling with its too wide mouth and its rows of black teeth. And it will no longer ask to be let in.
Leo and his younger brother Eli had been running Shine for nearly 2 years now, using the same twisting web of forgotten logging roads that cut across the Kentucky-West Virginia border like scars. The backwoods tracks were narrow, rutted, and treacherous, but they offered cover from the prying eyes of revenuers who prowled the main routes. It was dangerous work, but it was good money, and their Uncle Virgil trusted them to deliver. On that particular night, the sky was star-shot and moonless, the kind of night smugglers prayed for. The brothers rode in their battered pickup, jars of moonshine rattling in the bed. Leo had the wheel, his strong hands steady even when the truck bucked over deep potholes. Eli rode shotgun, humming tunelessly, his long legs braced against the dash. The air was cool, carrying the sense of pine and damp earth. And for a while the only sounds were the truck's rumbling engine and the glass clinking in the back. They laughed at some joke Eli cracked, the kind of easy banter that came when fear hadn't yet crept into their bones. For a brief stretch, it felt like they were untouchable. Then they rounded a bend. The laughter died. A figure stood in the road. He was tall, wrapped in a long, stained coat that reached nearly to his boots. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, though the high beams of the truck caught the pale line of his jaw. Beside him rested a rickety, hand-built cart piled high with shapes that were too indistinct to make out, but seemed, somehow, wrong. The man lifted one hand, long and thin, and held it out as if to command them to stop. Leo instinctively eased his foot from the gas. "Don't," Eli whispered. His voice was thin, strained. His eyes were locked on the figure. "Don't stop, Leo. Just go around him." Leo shot him a puzzled look. He had never seen his brother afraid like this. "Who is it?" Leo asked. Eli swallowed hard. "The tally man." The words fell heavy, weighted with old fear. "The what?" "Our granddaddy used to tell me stories," Eli said quickly, eyes flicking nervously from the figure to his brother. "About Tug River, about him. The tally man comes to count what's owed." Leo scoffed, trying to shake off the cold unease creeping into his gut. Some backwoods ghost story, no doubt, a tale to keep kids in line. He pressed the accelerator again, determined to slip past. But as though anticipating the move, the figure stepped directly into their path. The beams illuminated his face, gaunt and stretched taut over a skull-like frame. His eyes were dark, sunk deep into their sockets. In his hands, he clutched a small slate board and a piece of chalk. He leaned forward until his face was inches from the windshield. His eyes never blinked. Slowly, deliberately, he raised the slate. 2 words were scrawled across it in messy white script. 2 souls. Then, with unnatural precision, the man tapped the chalk twice against the glass directly in front of Leo's face. Tap, tap. A chill shot down Leo's spine. Without hesitation, he slammed his foot on the gas. The truck roared forward, and the man vanished beneath the glare. Leo kept his eyes straight ahead, hands locked on the wheel, but something compelled him to glance in the rearview mirror. The road was empty. No man, no cart. "What the hell was that?" Leo shouted, breath ragged. Eli's hands trembled in his lap. His face was pale, sickly in the dim glow of the dash. "He was counting us," Eli said hoarsely. "That's what he does. He counts." Neither spoke again for some time. The only sound was the crunch of gravel under the tires, the steady hum of the motor. But the night seemed heavier now, pressing in on them from the woods. The stars themselves appeared dimmer, swallowed by some unseen shadow. Then, just as abruptly as it had begun, the engine coughed, sputtered, died. The truck rolled to a stuttering stop. "What now?" Leo muttered, twisting the key, pumping the pedal. Nothing. Dead. He slapped the steering wheel in frustration. Damn it, the gauge said half a tank. But the needle now rested firmly on empty. Both brothers sat frozen in the sudden silence. The woods around them seemed too still, as though it holding its breath. Then came the sound. Scritch, scratch. The slow, deliberate scrape of chalk on slate. It drifted from the trees on both sides, echoing faintly, as though the forest itself were carrying the sound. Each stroke was measured, unhurried. Counting. Eli's voice broke the stillness, low and terrified. "Leo, he's still here." Leo's instinct screamed at him to get out, to run. He threw the door open, the night air biting cold against his sweat-damp skin. "Come on," he said, grabbing his brother's arm. "We're not sitting here waiting for him." They fled into the trees, leaving behind the truck, the shine, everything. Branches tore at their clothes and scratched their faces, roots snagging at their boots. Behind them, faint but steady, the sound of chalk on slate followed. Scritch, scratch. It never seemed to get closer. It never seemed to fade. It was simply there, dogging them through the black woods. Hours passed in a blur of fear and exhaustion. When they finally stumbled out onto cracked pavement of a main road at dawn, their clothes were ripped to shreds and their shoes nearly falling apart. Leo doubled over, hands on his knees, sucking air. Eli collapsed in the ditch, his eyes hollow. They never went back for the truck. A week later, Uncle Virgil did. He'd been furious at first, demanding to know why his nephews had run out on a job. But his anger soured into silence when he found the vehicle abandoned. The bed was empty, every jar of moonshine gone. More unsettling was what he found on the driver's side door. Scratched deep into the metal, as though carved with a sharp piece of stone, was a single symbol. 2. Uncle Virgil didn't press the boys after that. He saw the look in their eyes, the haunted way they flinched at sudden sounds. The shine business continued, but Leo and Eli never drove those logging roads again. Sometimes, late at night, Eli would wake screaming, convinced he heard the scraping of chalk again. Leo would calm him, though his own ears rang with phantom sounds. Neither brother ever spoke of the gaunt man in the road to anyone else. But in the Tug River country, whispers endured. Some swore they'd seen the tallyman, standing silent by the roadside with his cart of shadows, chalking numbers onto his slate. Some said he was older than the coal towns, older than the river itself, a spirit born of debts unpaid, debts of blood, of sin, of soul. And always, always, he came to count. For those who heard his chalk, there was no mistaking it. He never stopped at one. He never stopped until he was done.
The abandoned resort town of Elkmont, tucked deep in the Smoky Mountains, was a ghost of its former self. Once it had been alive with laughter, music, and the bustle of wealthy vacationers escaping the sweltering summers of Knoxville. But now, the cabins and lodges were hollow shells, their timbers sagging with rot, their windows blackened like blind eyes. The Appalachian clubhouse, once the grand centerpiece of the retreat, stood in ruin at the edge of the forest. Park Ranger Evangeline, Evie Carter, tightened the strap of her satchel and pushed the warped front doors open. The air that greeted her was stale and heavy, thick with dust and the acrid scent of mold. Shafts of weak afternoon sunlight pierced through cracks in the roof, painting long, crooked shadows across the ballroom floor. She stood in the center of the once opulent room, her boots crunching on glass and plaster. Her task was simple: document structural damage for the preservation board. Either the building would be restored as part of the park's heritage program, or it would be condemned to demolition. Evie took out her notepad, jotting down the state of the crumbling fireplace. The silence pressed in on her, broken only by the scratching of her pen. And then she heard it. A sound so sharp and foreign in the dead building that it stopped her hand mid-stroke. A child's laughter, bright and playful, echoing through the upstairs rafters. Evie froze, breath caught in her throat. She waited, listening hard, telling herself it was just the wind rattling the old beams. But no, it came again, a lilting giggle bouncing down from the second floor. Her radio crackled. "Carter, you got visitors up there?" He was her partner, Miles, posted at the trailhead a quarter-mile down. "Sounded like a kid." She swallowed, pressing the button. "Negative, Miles. It's just me in here." Her voice betrayed none of the unease curling in her stomach. "Probably just the wind." But her words sounded hollow in the thick silence. The laughter came again. This time it was closer, clearer, as if a child were perched just at the top of the grand staircase, waiting. Her pulse quickened. She swung her flashlight toward the stairs. A shadow darted across the landing. A small figure, quick and fleeting. Training overrode fear. "Hello?" she called, firm and commanding. "This area is closed to the public. If you're lost, I can help you back to the trail." The beam of her flashlight trembled as she ascended the stairs. Each creaking step groaned under her weight. The second floor stretched into a long corridor of rooms, wallpaper peeling in ragged strips, doors hanging crooked from rusted hinges. At the end of the hall, bathed in pale light from a broken window, stood a small girl. She wore a tattered white dress that floated just above bare feet. Her hair hung in limp strands across her back, unmoving in the still air. Evie steadied herself. "Sweetheart, are you lost?" Her tone softened instinctively. The child did not move at first. Then, slowly, too slowly, her head began to turn. "I was," she said. Her voice was delicate at first, but it began to warp mid-sentence, deepening, splitting into a grotesque mockery of innocence. "But I'm found now." When she faced Evie fully, the ranger's composure shattered. The child's face was not a face at all, but a pale, waxy mask, smooth and featureless save for a wide, jagged mouth carved too deep into her skin. That smile widened as if it had been waiting centuries to be seen. Evie staggered back. The thing raised a hand, its fingers long and gray, and hooked them in the corner of its mouth. With deliberate cruelty, it tugged the skin outward, stretching it like soft clay. The flesh rippled and distorted grotesquely. Then came the voices. Not one, but many, layered and overlapping. A man's booming laugh, a woman's broken sob, the gurgle of someone drowning, and beneath it all, the high-pitched sweetness of a child. They all poured from that impossibly wide grin in a sick chorus. "We've been so lonely." Evie's body reacted before her mind could. She spun, bolting down the hallway. Her boots hammered the warped floorboards as the cacophony followed her, the laughter chasing her like an echo from all directions. She slammed down the staircase two at a time, nearly losing her footing, and burst through the front doors into the cool mountain air. She didn't stop running until she reached the trailhead, chest heaving, vision blurred with panic. Miles was waiting, leaning against the ranger truck. He straightened instantly at the sight of her. "What happened?" he demanded. Evie could barely form the words. "There's something inside." She bent over, gasping. "A little girl, or something that looked like one." Miles's brow furrowed, but his eyes weren't skeptical. They were grim, as though he had been expecting this. He gestured toward the ground at her feet. In her flight, she had dropped the leather-bound guest ledger she had been carrying out of the clubhouse. Its pages flapped open in the mountain breeze. Evie crouched to pick it up. On one of the yellowed pages, scrawled in faded ink, were words scribbled over and over again, each line in a different hand, different style, different pressure. "Don't follow the laughter." Her skin prickled. They secured the site as dusk settled, setting up temporary barriers and chains across the clubhouse entrance. But as Evie glanced back one last time, her blood turned to ice. Upstairs, behind a cracked pane of glass, pale faces pressed against the window. Not one, but many. Their features were blurred, melting into one another like wax figures left in the sun. Their mouths moved in eerie unison, wide and smiling. They weren't trying to get out. They were waiting, patiently, for someone else to come in. The days that followed should have been routine. Evie filed her report, Miles marked the clubhouse as restricted access, and the incident was chalked up to stress or imagination by their superiors. But Evie knew what she had seen, and the mountains knew it too. When she hiked past Elkmont later that week, she swore she could hear it again. Faint, high-pitched giggles threading through the trees, carried on no wind. Miles heard them too, though he refused to speak of it. The forest seemed to lean closer, as if listening, as if guarding its secret. One night, unable to shake the weight of the experience, Evie dug through archived reports. She found entries from other rangers dating back decades. Odd noises in Elkmont, disembodied laughter, unaccounted shadows. Guests at the Appalachian clubhouse were disappearing without explanation in the early 20th century. The ledger she had dropped had not been the only warning. Others had left notes, desperate scratches in the margins of guest books, carvings in wooden beams. "Don't follow the laughter. It's not a child. It wears their voices like clothes." By the time she pushed the documents away, her hands trembled. She realized the truth. This thing in Elkmont wasn't bound to the building. It had haunted those halls long before the beams rotted, long before the vacationers fled. The Preservation Committee wasn't saving a building. They were preserving a prison. And prisons have doors. The next week, a construction crew arrived to begin restoration work inside the Appalachian clubhouse. Evie stood at the tree line, unease rooting her in place as workers hauled tools inside the Appalachian clubhouse. She wanted to scream at them to stop, to shut the doors forever, to let the forest reclaim the cursed place. But she didn't. As twilight fell and she turned to leave, the wind carried a sound, faint but unmistakable. Children's laughter, sweet, playful, and hungry.